What's up, everybody? It's Soren Baker here on Unique Access Entertainment. As always, please hit that subscribe button while you're down there. Join our channel, 3 different tiers. That helps us out and also helps get us to the next level of the game. We're trying to go for that #1 spot, but we need your support to get there. Now, today on the 1st of 15th, I wanted to talk about a tweet that I'd seen recently. This one was from Tony the Dome, and he tweeted, "I swear, stan culture is crazy. Listen, your favorite rapper has some songs and albums that other people don't like, and that's perfectly fine. Hell, Nas has some songs and albums I don't like, and he's my favorite MC. Go to me. Some people go overboard." Now, I got to shout out Tony Jerome for this because I agree. Now, I also think it's wild because icons from other genres have easily more than a dozen albums. Many people don't know any songs from most of them or some of them. You look at somebody like a Neil Young or a Bob Dylan or a Bruce Springsteen or a Paul McCartney. These are some of the biggest people in music history. They have dozens of albums, if not close to 50 albums. And obviously lots of jazz artists too. And you get into the Parliament Funkadelic and all the offshoots and spin-offs that they had. Lots of these dudes and women have so many albums, but in rap, it's unfortunately because it moves so fast, a lot of times the artists get kind of sidetracked if people don't like one of their albums. And sometimes it does end their career, which I think is terrible. But to Tony Jerome's point, or Tony the Dome's point, I think that it's something that we're getting away from a little bit because rap now has been around for a long time. And I think also because rap is now showing that it's easier to make albums and lots of people are putting out 10 plus albums. So there is a little bit more of brand loyalty. But let's look at this a little more closely with some very select few artists. And I'd like to get your comments. Maybe I'll do a part 2 of this. But since rap albums do matter more, and some of the artists I'm going to talk about have a lot of albums, that helps the cause. But let's get with Nas, since that's Tony the Dome's favorite, and that's who he came out with first. And mentioning that, a lot of people look at Nostradamus, which dropped in November, the end of 1999, which is coming off the heels of I Am, also in April of 1999. So a lot of people at the time back then thought Nostradamus was less than or not as good as it should have been. And of course, generally speaking, though, I think there's a few double LPs that I think are as good as normal albums, just because you got so many songs that if you cut half the songs and just had the best half, the album would be a lot better. I'd heard back in the day that Nas was going to do a double album with Nostradamus and I Am, or at least those songs. Didn't end up happening that way, but I do think if you look at Street's Disciple in 2004, obviously Nas had been out for a decade at that point, but I don't think that that's one of his best albums. And I think, again, had he trimmed half the songs, you'd have a phenomenal LP. And I think that's the challenge of this type of thing when you're putting out so much material, that some of it, of course, generally speaking, is not going to be as good as the others. But the thing that I want to point out with Nas in particular, before I get to some of these other artists, even though it applies to them as well, if any other artist had put out Street's Disciple, I Am, or Nostradamus, they would be looked at as elite albums, or at least very good albums, or at least way above average. So it's all context with everything in rap. Some people you look to for their lyrics. Some people you look to because you like their flows. Some people have better production. Some people you just like their accent or whatever. It's all different stuff, or what their subject matter is. So it's all different. But to my point with I Am, you got Hate Me Now, you got Favor for a Favor, you got Ghetto Prisoners, you got Nas Is Like. That's 4 songs that are stellar, that a lot of people love, and that, again, most people, generally speaking, don't have 4 songs on their albums that are that good. Nostradamus, of course, had Project Windows, and the title track, which had the same beat from the J.B.s that EPMD famously used early on in the game with Let the Funk Flow, one of my favorite all-time beats. So Nostradamus, the song, I really liked, even though the album wasn't as good. But, let's move on to Street's Disciple. Despite it being a double album, you got the unauthorized biography of Rakim, UBR. A lot of people love that. You got the Thief's Theme bonus track, which of course came out before. The title track, Street's Disciple, people love that too. So even though these are quote unquote lesser Nas albums, they're still, generally speaking, excellent bodies of work. And I think if we go back and look at them, yes, they're not as good as some of Nas's premier work, but obviously they're stellar. Moving on to Jay-Z, and just to show my point of we need to give artists room. So, for instance, what if Jay-Z had only dropped the Blueprint to The Gift and the Curse, which many people that I talked to at the time, many of my friends, many people in the music industry, they didn't particularly care for the Blueprint to The Gift and the Curse. They also thought it was not a good album in general, and definitely one of their lesser Jay-Z albums. Came out in 2002, of course, on the heels of the Blueprint from 2001, which is by many viewed as one of Jay-Z's best albums, and I would also argue an excellent album, if not phenomenal album. But to follow it up, that could have quote unquote ended Jay-Z's career. Nobody really thought that at the time, but given the backlash of the Blueprint 2, that definitely could have caused him a lot of problems. The great thing about it is in 2003, Jay-Z came back with the Black Album and he's been just fine and remains to be, and is still doing great things with Rock Nation. A lot of his guest appearances, even though those have slowed down recently, but 444 is one of his most acclaimed albums. Came, it's the last album, and it came, decades into his career. So I think that just shows you that we need to give artists some latitude and some space. Not everything they're going to do is going to be top tier. If you go to Tupac, the number two best-selling rap artist of all time, if we just go up through Machiavelli, the albums that he really worked on while he was alive, I guess people would say because a lot of people didn't get to it when it came out or was overlooked for a variety of reasons, but I guess people would say Tupacalypse Now, even though I think there's a lot of great material on there, especially Trapped. Of course, they had a song for that. Violent is one of my favorite songs on there, if not my favorite song on Tupacalypse Now. If My Homie Calls is another one of my standout tracks. I don't remember that being a single, but if it was, it wasn't pushed like Brenda's Got a Baby or Trapped, for instance. So right there, you got four great songs at the minimum, and there's Soldier Story. There's so many songs on Tupacalypse Now that are great that I think really show you that despite it being quote unquote not his best album, it's also his first album. He's finding his footing. He's getting into the studio full time and doing it on a major label, Interscope Records. So it is what it is. And again, Tupac ended up just fine, artistically being at this time, I believe, the second best selling artist of all time, which gets into the whole Stan culture because Eminem, the Marshall Mathers LP, that's where we get the Stan in the year 2000. That song, phenomenal song. If you guys haven't seen it, maybe you can find it online. I wrote and produced the Ultimate Albums episode for VH1 on Eminem's The Marshall Mathers LP. So I write and produce television as well. And that one, I interviewed Eminem for it. I interviewed Dr. Dre. I interviewed Snoop Dogg. I interviewed Exhibit. I interviewed Jimmy Iovine. Rest in peace. I interviewed Proof. But I interviewed a lot of his collaborators and even Marilyn Manson, who was on the Way I Am remix. So Eminem, the creator of the Stan thing, I think you would say of his prime stuff that Relapse Per Se was his least good album. And I know that Eminem publicly has said that he cringes while listening to it. So that's something that we know Eminem isn't fond of it. I wasn't particularly fond of it when it came out in 2009. But like Jay-Z, coming off of the Blueprint 2 to Gift and the Curse, Eminem was able to rebound rather nicely with 2010 with the perhaps unironically titled Recovery. Coming off of the Relapse, now he's got the Recovery. And that ended up being a huge smash for him, a lot of big songs, and put Eminem back on top of the game to where he was one of the unquestioned leaders. Now, as my friend Dana Dane would say, let's go full circle with this though and come back to Nas and back to Tony Didome's tweet. Because if we look at Nas after he was on Columbia and Def Jam, the two major labels he was signed to, and started really putting out stuff independently on Mass Appeal, his label, just since 2020, we've seen 3 King's Diseases, and we've also seen 3 installments on Magic. And he's putting out other artists, and he's doing a lot of great stuff beyond music with his investments and some of his other entrepreneurial endeavors with film, etc. But The main point of this is if an artist is elite or they're our favorite artist, we got to give them time. We got to give them the ability to evolve and to adjust to maybe they made a mistake. Maybe they were in a bad mood. Maybe they were depressed, like Eminem says, with relapse. So there's all these different things that are going on that an artist can go through, and maybe they just didn't do their best work. That's also possible. Nobody does their best work all the time. So, all that to be said, I think it's important that we look at these things through the prism of what is really going on in music, what's going on in their lives, and the fact that so many of the elite artists in essentially every other genre of music have a lot more latitude than we tend to give rap artists. And that's why I wanted to talk about it here on the 1st and 15th. The stan culture, as Tony D.O.C tweeted, is crazy, man. And I know my appreciation for Nas, if you haven't checked it, check out this video I did on, Nas deserves more respect several years ago. But the point is, Nas is one of the best rappers we've ever seen. To many people, he is the GOAT. He is the greatest. And I think as time goes on, my appreciation for Nas grows, but annually, I would say, because he keeps putting out great material. King's Disease 2 back in 2001, I think, is the best album of that year, most likely. And for somebody that came out in 1994 with Illmatic to then in 2021 to put out King's Disease 2, which in my opinion is probably the best album of that year, that just shows you what a great artist Nas is. And that's something that's important and why Tony D.O.C's tweet really stood out to me and is something that I thought was so important to highlight. We got to give our artists space. We got to give them the ability to adapt and evolve as in the landscape of music and how music is consumed. Think about Illmatic back in 1994, cassettes, CDs, and to a lesser degree vinyl. Now that we're in 2025, we've moved largely, if not totally, into streaming, but then we have the nostalgia of vinyl, which wasn't even that big in the mid to late 1990s, unless you were a DJ, and then that kind of got taken out once we get to the Serato of things, but now vinyl has a resurgence. So just look at this evolution of music just since 1994, and Nas has been there in that regard every step of the way, putting out material ever since 1994, and thankfully on a semi-regular basis for the most part during that entire time. So that's why I want to speak about it here on the 1st to 15th. Thank you for your support as always. If you haven't already, as I mentioned, hit that subscribe button and please tell a friend. We need to keep growing the channel and get up to that 100,000 subscriber mark because that really helps the cause. From what I've heard, we're more than halfway there, but we need your help. And of course, if you haven't, you can join Unique Access, become a member. You can follow me on all social media at Soren Baker. And definitely, I appreciate your support here on the 1st and 15th. Till next time.